I'm getting the feeling that we don't actually know what agents are. And I don't know either, but I'm noticing a lot of new agents that are basically just GitHub actions reviewing our PRs. And I thought to myself, I could do that. So I gave this talk a couple weeks ago about finding feature maintainers. And if you're at All Things Open, you saw it. If you didn't, it'll probably have a video pretty soon, shortly on their YouTube. But I brought up this thought about finding feature maintainers. And the problem we have is that we're handing over a lot of what we're doing over to agents and automating, especially in the world of open source. A lot of the knowledge transfer around open source projects happen at the time of issues or happens at the time of the PRs or code review. And something I pride myself around is like when you open up a PR, you've done your first review yourself. But a lot of times we're actually just vibing a lot of this stuff and we're not actually reviewing the code until it gets to the PR because the assumption is that the code review agent is going to review it first. Now, this could be a problem because a lot of code review agents, like the data could live somewhere else. We're using these things for free. And when using it for free, you might be the product. We all know that saying. But what I'm getting at is I thought to myself, man, I used to work at GitHub. I know a ton about the GitHub API. Why don't we just build an action to do our own code review using our own data? So I was just going to show you what I built so far. So I figured I'd just jump directly to the punchline and just say I built this thing called Codebunny. This is all open source. I've been running this for the last couple months. And I got the inspiration from when the Gemini team actually shipped a bunch of GitHub actions to triaging and also code review within repositories. Now, they've since actually archived this to now run in the Run Gemini CLI. I actually don't think these actions are as good as the ones they shipped originally. It is archived, so you can't actually use this. But what I found when you look through specifically the YAML, I think show you pretty much all the secret sauce on how this is made. Pretty convinced this is not meant to be a secret sauce thing, but what I'm getting at is you can pass in a private key if you want to make this work with the GitHub app, which got me my wheels turning because if anybody knows me from at least YouTube or my previous days at GitHub, I was super big into GitHub apps before Actions came out. I actually have a pretty popular video on YouTube about GitHub apps. But what I'm getting at is I thought this was actually really cool because this showed you how to essentially pass in your Gemini token and then do code review, specifically at PR time. What's even better about this is if you go down to the prompt, you've got literally the entire prompt on how you would do code review within a GitHub action. So I took this prompt and I built Codebunny. So previously it was a generic experience within my contributor info repo, but I'll show you exactly how it's working. I went to PR just merged, and what I have with Codebunny is I've got a couple of different PR review bots here, but what I've been doing is I've been essentially just leveraging it to do first touch PR reviews. A lot of times I'll do some work within my agent locally in the terminal, and to check the work, sometimes I don't always have the VS Code open or my Vim open. So I'll push it up because I'll have to like create a checkpoint to walk away. Here, I've got like the PR reviews I've been using with Claude. They've been great. But what I like to do is do PR reviews every time I push while the PR is still a draft. So to explain this is essentially at the time the PR is opened, and specifically I'm running this on drafts as well, because every time I'm vibing locally in my terminal or in my Vim, I want to push stuff up to get some feedback on some decisions made. I don't always want to ask questions with my agent locally and go back and forth with some stuff. Kind of want to see the shape of what's been done so far. So a lot of times I like to push up a commit, review that commit, and then validate it actually is working. So the way Codebunny works is it specifically, if you install it as a GitHub action, the GitHub action itself can either run generic as a GitHub action, or you could pass in your own app tokens, but you can use the open source code. And that's what I would encourage everyone to do. But it gives me essentially just like this taken directly from Gemini CLI action that's been defunct now. And it gives me a review and gives me a TLDR of whether it should be merged right now or whether or not I should fix some other things that are still in flight. So catching things like security vulnerabilities before GitHub action. So I do have GitHub advanced security turned on my repo. I've got Sneak turned on my repo. A lot of stuff will get caught before I even get to the time of letting that run because I'll have the Codebunny action running. I did want to point out that this is all open source as well. So it is a GitHub repo. It's a GitHub action. If you're familiar with those, all the code is here. And I'm just sharing this because I wanted to explain like the ability for us to control the conversation, because what I like to do a ton of is have a story point specifically for my project. So I explained it being open source, would love some thoughts. I actually have a PR open about how do you store review history as artifacts inside of your action runner. The one thing I will mention that all of this is running inside of an action environment. So there's no server hosted anywhere else. It's specifically just running in the GitHub action. The only thing I'm doing is I'm maintaining my quad keys inside of continue. You could bring your keys or you can run this using your own sort of inference. So if you do have an open router or whatever, you can either host it on continue or you can just pipe that in directly. It will require, if you wanted to use Codebunny, you'll have to do a contribution to make that more flexible. But for now, it just runs the continue CLI under the hood. And the one thing that if you're not familiar with continue is a place that you can build extensible agents, coding agents. In this case, I have a pretty generic one, which is using Claude for Opus, because why not? I think with having a lot of context on a longer standing PR and also looking at issues, Opus does a pretty good job, but you could also run it on a lower model if you wanted to. But I'm specifically calling the review bot to be called within the CLI config. And then I have a couple of these contexts if I needed it. I don't actually end up using any of these because all the context is in the repo and it's all in the files that you're going to be touching. So specifically that's. So I mentioned that because I have a configurable agent, I can also bring in all the separate features that the local experience of Continue also has to offer. So within the code, I'm actually piping in all the rules within my repo. So contributor info.continue, this is where I'm running Codebunny, and I've been testing for the past couple months. I've got about 22 different rules specific on how I write code within this code base. For example, I think most code review bots are always complaining about things like magic numbers and like pulling up constants up to the top and all that sort of like business that I just don't really care about when I'm just vibing on my own. But I think that's super useful. Things like premature optimization. Like this is actually, I like having a rule like this, which is don't try to optimize the code and make it super performant without making it work first. And I've had some issues when I'm writing code with the agent and it tries to do like premature optimizations that don't matter at the time, just trying to make the thing work. I've got a couple other rules around how I manage my task, how I create PRDs, all the stuff that you've seen across the internet when you're thinking about like spec-driven development. All that is downloaded here, local within my config inside of my rules folder. And this is how I've decided to make this work. So if you're a rule user or if you're a CLI or continue agent user, highly recommend checking this out. And if you're not, check it out and give me feedback. But the one thing I want feedback on is I've got this PR open in the Codebunny repo, and specifically it's about implementing review history tracking with artifacts. So it is going to create an artifact in your GitHub action runner that will just give you context of the PR review. So a lot of times I'll push multiple commits as I'm fixing things. I'll make decisions and open up issues based on the feedback I'm getting. And it's nice to have that context living somewhere that I can track later. So the idea I have is, can I create essentially like a review file or a log that I can store in Markdown within the project that basically says, okay, these are all the interactions I have with Codebunny, or I can mention and say, no, fix that and fix this, or give me feedback on other things or make other decisions. I want to actually track that and measure that, perhaps do evals in the future. So just curious, if you are doing code reviews, I think it's actually one of the most important parts about writing with AI is like we're losing a lot of historical record. We're losing all that knowledge transfer because we're just trusting the agent to do a lot of the upfront heavy lifting. And I know if you've been doing this for a while, like some of the best parts of learning on the job is doing code review. It is working with senior engineers. It is working with junior engineers all around the table, talking engineering sync stuff. So I try to use my PRs in a very similar fashion where I am chatting with the agents because I have multiple code review bots as well, but I wanted to have a little bit more flexibility on where the data is going, but also have some more historical record because I have been getting a few contributions from outsiders outside of myself and my agents. So for them to come on board and make contributions, it's a bit more what I'm finding harder for them to jump in because I went from zero to tech debt in about a couple months. So for anybody who wants to join a new open source project that has a lot of tech debt and a lot of documentation, a lot of weird dragons everywhere, I'm finding it super helpful to have this documentation, have rules, and have now PR reviews of understanding how we got to certain places. And the goal is in the future, before starting work or as I'm approaching reviews, Codebunny will go check the review folder, check previous PRs, get historical context on how we got here, and not make the same sort of mistakes that agents will do where they're suggesting the same thing over and over again. And the story is I was building this project with not having performance in mind. The reason why performance is a rule is they would always try to take my Vite build config and try to do some premature optimizations and bundling that just weren't really necessary at the time that I was making this project. So it would just basically trip over itself all the time trying to build performance first experiences. And it was more of, I might have sort of like foot gunned myself in like setting up rules and setting up my project in a way that how that was. But highly recommend if you have any interest in checking out Codebunny. I did write a blog post on how I made this as well. I think he did this blog for years now called briandouglas.me. And I do have a whole blog post on how I built code and how I'm doing the pattern analysis, how I'm piping in custom rules, how it works. So if you're interested, check that out. I do also have a blog post on the Continue blog on specifically if you wanted to scale and build something like this for yourself or for your enterprise or your team. Definitely check it out. And if you're at all interested, I've got a guide specifically on how to build your own code review bot using Continue and GitHub Actions. Find and replace, make it your own, use Codebunny. Would love contributions and ideas. I've already got some ideas that are piping in hot on how I can expand this product. But with that said, like this is an opportunity for us to really just step into the next stage of AI native development. So all reviews are good reviews. Some reviews can take you to like the weird place or the dark place. Anyway, and subscribe.